can you believe we had 38 successful Jockle podcasts before I went and concussed myself? So think of it in the positive. We had 38 good ones. That's good. Maybe the rest of them won't be so good. Maybe I've lost a few IQ points, but that's fine. Don't be sad that it's over. Be happy that it happened. Today we're going to continue our adventures in reading Wikipedia, starting with Set. Set, the deity, the Egyptian deity, also known as Setesh, Sutek, Setek, or Suti, is, and apparently in Egyptian there is no vowel, so it's just st, not Seth, st. He's the god of chaos, the desert, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. So, if we had to try to do some trans-mythological comparisons, we might compare Seth as a deity to, like, Hitler. He's a god of violence, he's a god from the outside, or the Nordic god Loki, who is a god of chaos. He's not the god of death, that's an important thing here. He's the god of chaos, desert storms. We know that Thor in the Norse religion was the storm god, but he's also the god of disorder and violence. And when I read the Old Testament, I often look at the early figures in the Old Testament as sort of semi-divine figures, because there was this supernatural quality. They lived much longer lives, etc. So we could think of Cain and Abel as being mythological characters. So Cain would be the first murderer. Set here is the god of violence, so there's some connection there. As far as god of foreigners, I'm trying to think of, there's certainly in Greco-Roman tradition, there are gods which are said to be from outside. For instance, Dionysus, I believe, is supposed to have come from outside Greece, or he has a different homeland other than Mount Olympus. So there are other comparisons we could make. In ancient Greek, the god's name is given as Seth. Set had a positive role where he accompanies Ra, god of the sun, on his solar boat to repel Apep, the ancient deity who embodied chaos and was the opponent of light and Ma'at, order and truth. He appears as a giant serpent, and that is Apep. So this is kind of a strange contradiction where Seth opposes Apep, and yet they're both, in a way, they're both symbolic of chaos. So chaos versus chaos. I'm not sure what the significance is there, but we do have to remember, and a lot of times when we study ancient mythology, there are competing narratives, competing religions, competing mythologies that contradict one another. So really, in a sense here, we're not just talking about one Seth, but we're talking about many different versions of Seth, which all contradict one another. Set, or Seth, had a vital role as a reconciled combatant. Now, I don't even know what that term means, a reconciled combatant. A combatant that you reconcile with, so like the concept of mercy, perhaps. He was lord of the Red Desert land, where he was the balance to Horus's role as the lord of the Black Soil. In the Osiris myth, the most important Egyptian myth, Set is portrayed as the usurper who killed and mutilated his brother Osiris. So again, Cain and Abel. Here, Osiris is like Abel, Seth is like Cain. And the Osiris myth is about the murder of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, the underworld, and rebirth. He is green-skinned deity with a pharaoh's beard, mummy wrapped at the legs, wearing a distinctive Atef crown, carrying a crook and a flail. So a crook would be symbolizing the shepherd who guides the flock, and the flail represents the fertility of the land. I understood the crook to be a shepherd's hook, but I didn't actually know that the flail was symbolizing fertility. I thought that was sort of representing the crook being the way you guide the flock, and then the flail being the way you punish the flock. But I guess the flail is an agricultural symbol there. The son of the god Geb, and the sky goddess Nut or Nut. And I hadn't heard of Geb before. Apparently he's the god of the earth in general. He has a viper around his head and was considered the father of snakes. It is believed his laughter caused earthquakes and he allowed crops to grow. The Ennead was a group of 9 deities in Egyptian mythology worshipped at Heliopolis. And I believe Heliopolis, I guess it's a Greek name, but it's in Egypt. The ancient Egyptian name was Iunu, yeah. The location is not totally at the mouth of the Nile, but sort of around that area. One of the oldest cities in ancient Egypt, and it's the Heliopolis means city of the sun. It is the I guess maybe it is right at the mouth of the Nile Delta. So that's Heliopolis, worshipped Geb. Geb was sometimes read as Seb or sometimes Keb. Seb, Keb, we don't really know, but it was probably Seb, Keb, or Geb, one of the others. He was depicted as a ram, a bull, a crocodile, the father of snakes, which is interesting because Set here, he battles Apep, and Apep is a serpent. He represents the fertile earth and barren desert. So Geb is sort of a combination of Set together with Horus. They're the derivatives. Geb opening his jaws, imprisoning those not worthy to go to the fertile northeastern field of reeds. So that's Geb. Nut and Geb. So Geb is sometimes portrayed as having the head of a snake, which is interesting. Some Egyptologists have stated that Geb was associated with the mythological creator Gus, who had laid a world egg from which the sun and the world had sprang. This theory is assumed to be incorrect and a result of confusing the name Geb with that of a goose, originally called Gib. Alright, okay, fair enough. So there's a lot of confusion, a lot of stuff we don't know about ancient Egypt. Fair enough. Back to Seth, who is the main focus of today. He did kill his brother Osiris. Osiris' wife Isis, not the Islamic group, but Isis, the wife of Osiris, reassembled the corpse of Osiris. She produces and protects the heir Horus. So Horus is the son of Osiris. So I guess Horus would be the nephew of Seth, or Set. She was involved in healing spells, temple rituals, might have influenced the Navigium Isidis, the initiation ceremonies resembling Greco-Roman mystery cult. So she was eventually absorbed into Greece and then Rome as a foreign god. She represents nature, mother, mourner, universal goddess. So all kind of interesting there. Possible influence on Christianity. I don't know. That's there's some documentary that came out a while ago about how Christianity is just ancient Egypt gods or something. I don't know. That's a little bit theoretical. But Horus, who is the nephew of Set, sought revenge upon Set, and myths describe their conflicts. He married Nephthys and fathered Anubis. So we know Anubis has a jackal's head. Anubis, and I'm looking at the different ways to pronounce that. Egyptian Jinpu. So the Greek name for Anubis is Anubis, but the Egyptian name is Jinpu. It is the Greek name of a god associated with mummification and the afterlife with a canine head. He had different roles in various contexts. He was an embalmer. He was replaced by Osiris as the lord of the underworld. He attended the weighing of the heart, which determined whether the soul would enter the realm of the dead. Despite being one of the most ancient and most frequently depicted and mentioned gods in the pantheon, he plays no role in Egyptian myth. He was black in color, which represents regeneration, life, and the soil of the Nile, and the discoloration of a corpse after bombing. He has a female counterpart called Anput. His daughter is the serpent goddess Kebechet. So the whole process of embalming and attending to the dead and that sort of thing seems to be a very important part of Egyptian society. The concept of life after death, this obsession with life after death, kind of strange considering we have very little concern for life after death now. We just don't seem to care about it much at all. But the Egyptians seemed absolutely obsessed with the concept of life after death. It's also interesting that these anthropomorphic deities often have family members who are serpents. So that's an interesting concept. Seth's name might have originally been pronounced Sutich, based on the spelling of his name as Sith and Swith. The STS reflects the palatization of H. Oh, who even knows what palatization is? I know the palate's on the roof of the mouth, but we're just going to go with Set or Seth. The creature that represent like the face of Seth, sort of an unknown animal. Some people thought it was a giraffe, other people thought it was an aardvark, a donkey, a jackal, a fox. No one really knows what Seth is or what his head is about, but he does have a conflict with his brother or nephew Horus. So I guess the genealogy's messed up because all the gods are like marrying each other's brothers and sisters, but he has a conflict with Horus for the throne of Egypt. The Aeneid, which I keep thinking of the Aeneid, or the poem associated with Aeneas, but the Ennead is the assembled group of Egyptian deities. They're trying to decide who should inherit the kingship. The judge in the trial may be Geb, the father of Osiris and Set, or it may be Ra or Atum. Other deities like Thoth, who I think is a god of time, were involved. So they're trying to figure out how to do this. Isis uses her cunning and magical powers to aid her son, which to me sounds very similar to the myth of, I believe it's Jacob, Israel. He is aided because his father, Isaac, is supposed to give the blessing to Esau, but his mother sort of tricks the father and gets the blessing to go to Jacob, Israel, or Jacob, who would later be called Israel. The rivalry of Horus and Seth is portrayed in two contrasting ways. Horus is the son of Osiris and nephew of Set, and the murder of Osiris is an impetus for conflict. Other traditions depict them as brothers, so we don't really know. It's kind of strange. Horus spears Seth, who appears in the form of a hippopotamus as Isis looks on. Contending to describe the two gods, appealing to various other deities to arbitrate the dispute, and competing in types of contests, racing and boats, fighting each other as hippopotami, Horus repeatedly defeats Set and is supported by most of the other deities, yet the dispute drags on for 80 years, largely because the judge favors Seth. In later ritual texts, the conflict is characterized as a great battle involving two deities' assembled followers. And again, we could put this in the context of the Olympians versus the Titans, or the Aesir versus the Giants, as in Ragnarok. So the concept of two camps of deities fighting for world conquest in a great world war. That's something that shows up a lot. So the strife in the divine realm extends beyond the two combatants. At one point, Isis attempts to harpoon Set as he is locked in combat with her son, but strikes Horus instead, who then cuts off her head in a fit of rage. Thoth replaces Isis's head with that of a cow. This story gives a mythological origin for the cow horn headdress that Isis commonly wears. Seth sexually abuses Horus. Seth's violation is partly meant to degrade his rival, but it also involves homosexual desire, in keeping with one of Seth's major characteristics, his forceful, potent, and indiscriminate sexuality. So that's an interesting thing. Maybe not politically correct or gender sensitive, but that Seth is a rapist and he is depicted as a homosexual. I don't know. I thought the Egyptians were like pagans, and pagans were all down with that, and it was only Christians who made that. It was only Jews and Christians who ever made that taboo. But let's keep reading. In the earliest account of this episode, in a fragmentary papyrus, the sexual encounter begins when Seth asks to have sex with Horus, who agrees on the condition that Seth will give Horus some of his strength. The encounter puts Horus in danger because in Egyptian tradition, semen is a potent and dangerous substance akin to poison. According to some texts, Seth's semen enters Horus's body and makes him ill. But in Contendings, which is, I guess, a grouping of myths, in the Contendings myth, Horus thwarts Set by catching Set's semen in his hands. Wow, so I never knew that the Egyptians were so obsessed with semen. Like, this is, I don't know if Game of Thrones is pretty sexual. I was going to talk about Game of Thrones. I don't know if this deserves its own standalone video, but I was going to talk about the Nordicism of Game of Thrones. If you actually read Daenerys, I think is the name of the lady. So she is part of this family called the Targaryen family, and the Targaryen family, they're somehow this is like this family. I'm just trying to click through the wiki here to get to the whole thing, that they're like Valyrians. Let's look at the Valyrians, see if that comes up. Doesn't come up. There's so much stuff on this page. I just want text. I don't want any weird stuff. But they have this thing called the Targaryen Madness. And the Targaryen Madness is something like, if you know about the American Revolution, Mad King George, he's crazy, and he's crazy because of the purity of the royal bloodline. The House Targaryen carries the trait for insanity. Over 300 years of heavy inbreeding, marrying brother to sister whenever possible to keep the bloodline pure, resulted in many medical problems with incest. So this is Game of Thrones. We switched from Egypt to Game of Thrones for a second. And I wanted to try to figure out why this is happening. Why do they care about their bloodline so much? I don't know how to spell any of this stuff is the problem, or else I would, I haven't watched the show. I've just, there's even a page about incest where you can read about incest. Okay, not really. Let's see if I just try to spell this correctly. Valerian. Let's search Valerian. See if that... The Valerians, also known as the Old Blood... Nope. Just don't stop with the ads. The Valerians, the Old Blood of the Dragon, are a people and culture native to the Valerian Peninsula on the continent of Essos. Their empire, known as the Valerian Freehold, was the dominant civilization on the continent roughly 400 years prior to the War of the Five Kings. A cataclysmic event known as the Doom shattered the Valerians' capital city and all but obliterated them. So the Doom of Valeria was this catastrophic event, and there was this big problem. A volcano erupted or something, and everybody died, and they were very sad and everything. I was trying to figure out if there was something here that here's what I was looking at. So the Doom of Valeria is partially inspired by ancient disasters such as the destruction of Pompeii by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Author George R.R. Martin has said that the Valerian Freehold itself is loosely analogous to the Roman Republic in his fantasy land. It is also partially inspired by myths about the fall of Atlantis. So that's interesting. So George R.R. Martin is saying that the Valerians represent the Roman Republic. So the Valerians were known because they fashioned weapons which were far superior to those produced by other cultures. So you're starting, you're reading this and you're like, do I have some kind of bias here? Am I projecting my internal bias onto this show, onto this book series, onto this author? Am I just, you said, you're telling me that the Doom of the Valerians is based off the Roman Republic, and you're telling me that they produce weapons far superior to those produced by other cultures, and they're represented by their conquest of the dragons. The dragons are these fire, so kind of like dragons, tanks, dragons, machine guns, dragons, firearms. Okay, I don't know. It seems like you're kind of setting up the Valerians to be like sort of this Eurocentric culture in a way. So how do we go from here? Who are these Valerians? The Valerians, what were they all about? The language High Valerian gave birth to a number of dialects. Valerians have intermingled with local populations to such an extent they no longer exist as a major distinct group. So you're saying they went extinct because they race mixed. A few aristocratic families in the free cities still retain classic Valerian features. Classic Valerian features. Now, just give me a guess. What do you think? Again, I haven't watched. Again, I think I watched the first 2 episodes and then I sort of pieced out. I wasn't interested. But I watched the first 2 episodes and I've heard all the hubbub. Oh, they're all. I don't know. I don't care about giving away spoilers, but people are upset about the ending because the feminist queen kills the innocent people and then she gets killed. I don't know. But without having watched the show, I don't know, maybe you have and you know what I'm going to say, and this is all very boring to you, this pop culture stuff, but again, I'm telling you, there's this people called the Valerians, the Valerians, and the Valerians are based off the Roman Republic, and they're based off the Atlanteans, and they undergo this process called the Doom of Valeria, which is based off the fall of the Roman Republic / the fall of Atlantis. And they've ceased to exist as a distinct ethnic group because they've race mixed with other populations. But some aristocratic families retain classic Valerian features. What are those features? Okay, you've never watched the show, you don't know what it's like, you don't know what the show's about. A, are those classic features black skin and curly hair? Is it B, is it hooked nose and myopia? The poor eyesight, having to wear glasses? Is it C, hunchbacks and bad teeth? Is it hunchbacks and bad? Okay. Is it D? What else can we think? Do they have like green skin? What are the classic Valerian features? Okay, I'm gonna give it away. It's E. They possess light hair and distinctive eyes. People with such features are said to have the blood of old Valyria in their veins. So blonde hair. Typically, they're very fair-skinned with silver, platinum blonde hair, and violet or deep blue eyes. The Valyrians are known for their great beauty and possessed physical features not seen among other peoples of the world, at least not commonly. They had to practice incestuous marriages to keep the bloodline pure because they were so race mixed with everybody else. They're famous for their hair, their pale skin, and their violet purple eyes. Their hair color can vary from silver to white to gold, purple, blue eyes. So ethnic Valyrians tend to have more brightly colored eyes, such as blue. Inhabitants of the free city of Lys are directly descended from Valyrian colonists who didn't heavily intermingle with other people, so they retain classic Valyrian features. They have silver hair and purple eyes. Their more classic look is blonde hair with blue eyes. The Valyrians, as an ethnic group, were largely destroyed by the Doom. They intermingled with local populations. I just keep reading this, and it's like saying the same thing over and over again. In Volantis, the ruling aristocracy became obsessed with their identity and believed they were direct heirs of the Valyrian freehold. The nobility is obsessed with pure blood and practices apartheid-like separation between the aristocratic families and their slaves. And they have about 5 slaves to each man, so kind of like a Spartan society. Which is, wow. I don't know, guys. The fact that the family, the Targaryens, are totally responsible for everything bad that happens in Game of Thrones. Like the Targaryens, the Mad King, he starts the big war. I mean, if you read the lore or you watch the show. But I read through a little bit of the lore, and this Targaryen Valerian guy, this blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, destroys everything. He's crazy. He destroys the world. And then his daughter seems to be the one who's going to fix the world, and she destroys everything. She kills all the innocent people. So, you know, these people, these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people who incestuously marry, they refuse to race mix. They're like the ultimate evil that we blame everything on. And yet, it's really apparent here. It's very apparent that these people really are like the superior people. Like there's no illusion about it. It's like they have superior weapons. They're just better in general, and yet they have some kind of like fatal flaw of insanity that makes them evil and deserving of death. And who else has blonde hair, blue eyes, and practices incest? It's Cersei and Jaime Lannister, these evil, incestuous people, and you know, they're the members of the Valley. Yeah, we're just going over the same thing over and over again. So, yeah, common theme. So I don't know, you could call Game of Thrones anti-white if you wanted to. It's really more anti-Nordic in a sense. But at the same time, it's like it's riding this thin line between Nordic supremacy, just stating that the Valyrians were just objectively superior. So it's sort of riding that line, and then on the other hand, saying that like you should kill all Nordic people and they should all race mix so that they don't turn out to be crazy. So it's sort of like riding this bipolar schizophrenia back and forth between, yeah, the Valyrians were blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and they were better than everybody else, but at the same time, they had like this fatal flaw of craziness, and they need to just mellow out and smoke some kush and like marry some Dothraki or like, you know, marry to some out-group. And people have probably covered this before. I know that there have been a few pop culture analyses of Game of Thrones from this sort of perspective. I haven't really been interested in watching that, because I would rather just like figure it out for myself than listen to somebody else tease it out. So Anyway, let's get back to the Egyptian stuff for a second, maybe finish this up. We were talking about Seth and his sexual proclivities. We were talking about the power of semen. What else happened? So Horus, we stopped in the Egyptology when we were talking about Horus catches Seth's semen in his hands. Isis retaliates by putting Horus's semen on lettuce leaves that Seth eats. Seth's defeat becomes apparent when his semen appears on his forehead as a golden disc. He has been impregnated with his rival's seed and as a result gives birth to the disc. Thoth takes the disc and places it on his own head. It is there's a lot of semen obsession. These people were obsessed with the afterlife and semen. Another important episode concerns mutilations. Horus injures or steals Seth's testicles, and Seth damages or tears one out, or both of Horus's eyes. Sometimes the eye is torn to pieces. Seth's mutilation signifies the loss of virility and strength. The removal of Horus's eye is even more important, for the stolen eye of Horus represents a wide variety of concepts in Egyptian religion. One of Horus's major roles is as a sky deity, and for this reason his right eye was said to be the sun and his left eye the moon. The theft or destruction of the eye of Horus is thus equated with the darkening of the moon in the course of its phases or during eclipses. Horus may take back his lost eye, or other deities may retrieve or heal it for him. The Egyptologist Tevelda argues that the tradition about the lost testicle is a late variation on Seth's loss of semen to Horus, and that the moon-like disc that emerges from his head is the impregnation, is the eye of Horus. If so, the mutilation and sexual abuse would form a single story in which Seth assaults Horus and loses semen to him. Horus retaliates and impregnates Seth. Seth comes into possession of Horus's eye. Thoth is a moon deity. It would make sense for Thoth to step in and mediate the conflict. The restoration of the eye of Horus to wholeness represents the return of the moon to brightness and the return of the kingship to Horus and other aspects of Ma'at. The order, harmony, law, morality, justice. Ma'at is also a goddess in herself, and her opponent was Isfet. And Isfet is injustice, chaos, violence, or evil. Isfet is the dualistic opposite. The principles of contrariness between Isfet and Ma'at are exemplified in this little tale. Those who destroy the lie promote Ma'at. Those who promote the good will erase the evil. As fullness casts out appetite, as clothes cover the nude, and heaven clears up after a storm. So that's interesting. Ma'at and Isfet. Good and evil. Sometimes the restoration of Horus's eye is accompanied by the restoration of Seth's testicles, so that both gods are made whole. He's also the protector of Ra, sort of like the angel of death, maybe. The god Seth, he did not worship any other deity except Seth, so the Hyklos king Apophis worshipped Seth exclusively. A representation of of evil. The Hyksos. So the Hyksos sometimes are associated with Proto-Hebrews or Proto-Semites or Proto-Israelites. And no one really knows who they were. They're people of diverse origins. But Hyksos means rulers of foreign lands. And they chose Set as their god, as god of the foreigners. So they adopted Seth. So Apophis was Hyksos. If you never heard of the Hyksos, it's Hyksos, Hyksos. And he has a Canaanite background, so that's why people sort of associate the Hyksos with the Hebrews. There's this Canaanite connection there, and he worshipped Set Seth exclusively. He said Seth is the only god and we can only worship Seth. He was ruling about from 1575 BC to 1540 BC. So the god of foreigners worshipped Seth exclusively. That's interesting. Amos the First overthrew the Hyksos and expelled them. At this point, the xenophobia took over and they rejected Seth. So, but some of the people of Ramses, the Ramses dynasty, were in favor of Seth. Seth was a storm god, possibly related to the Hittite deity Teshub, or the Hurrian god of sky and storm. Taru was the name of a similar Hattic storm god. Tarhun, Tarhunt, Tarhuant, Tarhunta, from the root Anatolian to defeat, conquer. He's depicted as standing on a bull. He has a triple thunderbolt as a weapon with an axe or mace. Swallowed his father's Anu's genitals, similar to the Greek story of Uranus, Cronus, and Zeus. So, that's an interesting thing there. I didn't know An or Anu is the supreme god in ancient Mesopotamian religion, and his symbol is 4 little poles, or I don't know what you'd call these. They look like 4 needles crossing one another. He who contains the entire universe. He is overthrown by his son Kumarbi, the chief god of the Hurrians, son of Anu, bit off his father's genitals. So Kumarbi seems to have this relationship with Anu in the same way that Zeus has the relationship with Cronus, this antagonistic father-son relationship, which is interesting. So we're seeing a lot of parallels here. We're going to skip, I think, the rest of that. But it does bring up some interesting questions. These aren't questions that I can answer. I don't have special insight into this, but there are these possible directions we could go in, some hypotheses that we could make about Seth, who Seth was, the concept of inversion, the concept of Satanism, worshiping that which is evil, worshiping the gods of chaos and destruction, the concept of hedonism. So I think these are all important things. I'm starting to get involved in what is right now a Pythagorean study group. And Pythagoras is old school. He's so old school, we don't even know everything about him we'd like to know. So, he's old school, and this old school stuff is interesting. And it's not something we're ever going to have certainty about. We can never certainly know what did the Egyptians really think, because their opinions changed over time. They changed their religion. It was an evolving, living tradition. So, there's not even one right answer to any of these questions. Who were the Hyksos? Who is Seth? What's all this stuff about semen? Was there a point to this? Is there anything that we can look at this and see parallels in other religions? And can we see the way that ancient Egyptian mythology and morality and narrative, how does that relate psychologically and even physiologically to our present day state? These are interesting questions. I'm not an Egyptologist, but it's certainly something worth investigating, worth at least getting a taste for it and seeing if it's something that interests you. I think that's all for today. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.